Some people may know that famous line, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It was a famous line that's been said, and I don't know that I fully agree with that, but what the point around it was the shared behavioral norms, behavioral patterns that a group of people who are trying to work together toward an objective is immensely important to directing how people are going to think and act.
You hit on a pretty big pet peeve of mine. I'm definitely one of those, if you're not early, you're late. So I would immediately feel like, well, perhaps I made a mistake on that height.
It's sometimes called the fundamental attribution error. And what it means is we over attribute people's behavior to who they are as individuals. But let's flip the script. When we do show up late, do we point to ourselves? Of course not.
In my mind, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, okay, yes, maybe that person gets unlucky on their first day, and we've all been late before, and it's unfortunate if it happens when you're trying to make a good impression. But then I've also worked with people that were basically always late. They didn't think that clock mattered, and that's where I guess I get most.
I don't want to dismiss the fact that you are right. Some people are just kind of wired that way. But again, that's where topics like leadership come in.
Hi everyone, I'm Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast. Today I'm here with Dr. Ben Granger. He's the chief workplace psychologist at Qualtrics. He spent over 15 years building, running, and optimizing experience management programs across hundreds of global organizations. So, Dr. Granger, thank you for being on the show. Very excited to speak with you today. I think it's a very interesting topic. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited about it.
Can you kind of tell us a bit about your background? Tell us in kind of, I think what I said sounds very exciting, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more, so that as laymen, we can understand exactly what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, I'm a psychologist by education. I have a PhD in psychology. But the specific subfield that I got my degree in was organizational psychology. And it's not necessarily the most well-known subfield of psychology. I think a lot of people think, clinical counseling, which is where a lot of psychologists go in that field. Organizational psychology is about how you apply the principles of human psychology to the workplace. And so basically my work is around how to help organizations manage the experiences that they create for their employees, manage the experiences that they create for their consumers from a psychological perspective. How do people perceive what they're saying and doing? And then what does that predict in terms of their behavior? And obviously, if you're a business leader, what people are going to do based on what you decide to do is of the utmost importance.
Yeah.
And I think that's especially true right now as we're moving into this AI augmented world.
Sure. So, I had not heard of that before, that particular branch of psychology. Sounds very interesting. How did you get into it? Like, what was I'm not in that world. So maybe when you're getting your PhD, it's more obvious that this is one of the options, but I've never heard of or met anyone in this particular area of psychology. It's very interesting, and I think super valuable for business owners. So I'm just curious, like what got you interested in it in the first place?
Well, there's kind of a deep story and there's the funny, shallow story. I'll tell the funny, shallow story first, which was when I knew I wanted to be a psychologist when I was in high school. I took a psychology class when I was a junior, and I was like, this is fascinating. I was just absolutely fascinated with the human brain and the human mind and how people think and why they do what they do. And so I knew I wanted to go into that. So I studied psychology as an undergrad, and I'm one of those rare birds that never changed his major in college. So I went straight through. But to start, when I first got into the program, I was dead set on being, counselor, clinical psychologist.
Right.
That's what I thought a psychologist was. And then as we started to get further in our studies and we started to get closer to actually doing counseling work, I started to realize that this is going to tear me apart. I'm tend to be a very empathetic person naturally. I feel people's pain. And so when I started to realize the reality of what I was about to get into, I just had this realization like, I don't think I can do this. I mean, I remember the thought crossing my mind, like, I'm gonna die before I'm 50,
Mm.
having to go through this. And what I must say at this point is thank God for those who can do that,
Yeah.
because we so badly need it. So there's certainly nothing against the field. It just wasn't for me. And so when I was a junior, kind of the funny story is we were in this measurement class. Because one thing a lot of people don't know about psychology is that it's very heavy on statistics and scientific method. A lot of people think, oh, it's about, all this soft, fluffy stuff. Sort of. But the way you get to those insights is very rigorous, and it's using, this very foreign field of mathematics called statistics that really wasn't invented until about 120 years ago. So it's a relatively new field of mathematics, and it's really challenging for a lot of people. It weeds a lot of people out. So I'm sitting there in this methods class, and I remember one day we're sitting all there, and the professor said, if you really want to make money in psychology, you got to go into organizational psychology. And everybody was like, what was that? What'd you say? So,
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
oh, money? Yeah, let's do
Right.
that.
Right.
So that was the first time I was introduced. I was a junior. I didn't know, to your point, Jason, I didn't even know that there was a subfield about essentially business psychology.
Yeah.
So at that point, I said, okay, that's interesting because I'm very interested in business. So I decided to pursue a minor in there. When I was in graduate school, I pursued a minor in business. I pursued a minor in sociology when I was an undergrad. So I got really interested in this, but the that's where I felt I fit. That's where I felt like my interest and my abilities fit, was in that business world, and so that's what I decided to pursue.
No, it's fascinating. I guess thankful for that teacher
Yes.
opening you up to that branch of psychology. So I don't. Anyway, there's a lot of talk about workplace culture. And so when you talk about organizational psychology and kind of that's the psychology of your employees and your customers, is that similar? Am I oversimplifying it? Like there just tends to be a lot of, I don't know, noise about workplace culture
Yep.
and its importance, which I completely agree it's important. But I would imagine a lot of it is at least based in this part of psychology, like this space.
Very much so. So I think if you even go back a little further, organizational psychology is a relatively new field of psychology. Um, really started, I think, officially in kind of the 1920s and really kicked off as a field in the 1950s. So it's relatively new, but
Mhm.
it's an offshoot of social psychology. And to your point, culture is, I mean, you can't read a social psychology text without digging deep into culture. So when you apply that to a workplace, I mean, let me back up and zoom out a bit. One of the things I think is so important in the work that I do, because I work with a lot of business leaders who are leading huge organizations, sometimes with millions of employees.
Okay.
And you're right, culture is almost always top of mind. Some people may know that famous line, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It was a famous line that's been said, and I don't know that I fully agree with that, but what the point around it was, the shared behavioral norms, behavioral patterns that a group of people who are trying to work together toward an objective is immensely important to directing how people are going to think and act. And so essentially, that's why in organizations that word culture is so important, because my operational definition of culture is simply it's the shared behavior patterns and beliefs among the group of people. And in my definition, an organization is quite simple. It's a group of people who are using shared resources to accomplish a shared objective. And let's go a step further. Find me an organization that exists today that doesn't meet some human need or desire.
Yeah.
They don't exist. If they don't meet a human need or desire, those companies don't exist. So what you really truly have is, we use that word company or organization, but I think it's really valuable to take a step back and reflect on what that word means. And that just means a group of people who are trying to work together to achieve a mission that's inevitably, invariably a human mission. And so when you start talking about groups of people working together to meet the needs of other people, culture must be in that conversation. Because one of the things that's really, I think, tragic about kind of how we think about ourselves as people is, most people, and myself included, by the way, dramatically underestimate the power of the environment in directing our behavior and our attitudes. We tragically underestimate that. And look no further than, if you see somebody, my favorite example, if you're hiring manager, Jason, and you're hiring a new person, and let's say they show up late to the first day of work, what's crossing through your mind?
Are you planning a remodel or construction project? Overwhelmed by the process? Over budget? Extended timelines? Strained relationships? We are all too familiar. At Lark Construction Services, we help homeowners and business owners take control of their construction journey, from reviewing bids and contracts to catching red flags before they become costly mistakes. Our Clarity Audit is a one-on-one expert review of your plans, estimates, or current progress, giving you the peace of mind and a defined action plan to move forward with confidence. Don't let confusion lead to costly errors. Visit larkconstruction.com and schedule your free call today. Lark Construction Services, saving you time, money, and stress.
Yeah, I mean, you actually, the funny thing is, you hit on a pretty big pet peeve of mine. I'm definitely one of those, if you're not early, you're late. So I would immediately feel like, well, perhaps I made a mistake on that hire.
Exactly. So that is something that's universal to humanity. It's sometimes called the fundamental attribution error. And what it means is, we over attribute people's behavior to who they are as individuals. But let's flip the script. What happens, like, I'm the same as you, Jason. I hate that feeling of being late to something.
Oh, yeah.
I'm usually super early.
Yeah.
But when we do show up late, do we point to ourselves? Of course not, right? Oh, traffic was terrible. I got kids. I mean, what do you expect? I had to get the kids ready for school. I mean, what do you expect, right? So we're more than willing to give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. Oh, that was the environment. But what are the tendency I want to hyper focus on here is, we're so tragically underestimate how influential the environment can be, right? And I think a lot of people say, oh, I'm a good person. It doesn't matter where I live or who I'm around. I'm gonna do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Of course you will, right? Until you get in that environment, until you start to become, those sorts of behaviors and those patterns and the words people use become normalized.
Yeah.
And then what do humans do? Humans, for the most part, adapt to their environments. So taking us all the way back to that culture, shared behavior patterns and mindsets and beliefs among a group of people is essential. And it's no wonder that that's such top of mind topic right now for business leaders.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes total. Well, I guess using that, can you relate that to the example of being late? Like, and maybe, in my mind, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, okay, yes, maybe that person gets unlucky on their first day, and we've all been late before, and it's like, it's unfortunate if it happens when you're trying to make a good impression. If it happens, a year into working someplace, nobody even notices. So there are some things, but then I've also worked with people that were basically always late. They didn't think
Right.
that clock mattered, and that's where I guess I get most, because I think you're showing disrespect to the rest of the team.
That's right.
In the sense that they're expecting you to be there. So maybe if you can use that example and relate it to what you just talked about, that might well, it'll help me. Hopefully it helps listeners.
Right, right. Yeah, thank you for that because I threw a lot in that answer there about culture. But let's take that person who shows up late for their first day at work and what they do after that is going to heavily depend on the response that they get from that manager, that hiring manager, and the rest of the team. It's going to heavily depend on what they see the other people do or not do. Now,
Sure.
I don't want to dismiss the fact that you are right. Some people are just kind of wired that way. Some people are just, no matter what you do and what environment you put them in, they're going to always be kind of late, back of the line, dragging
Yeah.
the rest of the team behind. But again, that's where topics like leadership come in. And leaders are, I think, again, underestimate their own roles in shaping culture. Because let's say the person comes in late, the leader pulls the person off to the side and says, "Hey, that's not how we do that here. We do not show up late. If what happened, it can be understanding at first because again, it's the first day of work, right?
Right.
But then what that person does and says afterwards, does the leader start showing up late every now and then and hold that person to a different standard than themselves? Or
Right.
do they show up first? And then when that person shows up late again, they notice they're the last person there and nobody else is doing it. And everybody else is kind of like, hey, come on. Well, that's going to influence that person's mindset and behavior more than likely. Does it mean it's going to completely change? Well, we don't know, but it's certainly going to influence. And so I think that's where culture, and again, culture, that shared behavior pattern and mindsets around those people have a strong culture of we show up on time, we show up early, and we get our stuff done. And somebody keeps showing late, that person's not going to last very long in that group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned, kind of the organizational psychology as it applies to your employees and as it applies to your customers. So, I mean, ultimately, would you say that this is very much about your leadership style? I mean, I guess I'll stop there. I'll let you answer, and then I won't rattle off 5 questions that are related to it.
I do. I think when I think about, in fact, I just recently wrote a book about this exact topic. And it's a leadership book that I never intended to write, to be honest, Jason. The reason I wrote it goes right back to your question. As I continue to look at all those things that we've seen from millions and millions of global employees across the years about what makes them tick, what keeps them engaged in their work, what keeps them at their company, what disengages them, what makes them hate their jobs, what makes them want to leave the minute they can. And then we look at consumers. What drives consumer trust? What brings consumers back to your organization? What kills trust?
Mhm.
And you just take those questions and you go back to the common denominator. And that common denominator is leadership. It's the decisions and the behavior patterns and the mindsets of the people who are leading those groups. All of it can be traced back to that, in my opinion. And so I do think that the ultimate responsibility and accountability this doesn't have to be a company for profit. This could be a community. This could be a church community. This could be a social community, a social group. But whatever that group's mission is heavily the ability of that team to meet the needs of those people outside of that group, inside of that group, all go back to the leader, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. How, I guess, how would you apply this to maybe the best way to ask this is if you're thinking about this from a departmental type of situation, right? So you've got your leadership, like you might have the CEO. Now you're going to have some layers of management, especially if you're working with such large organizations that you mentioned. You're going to have layers of management under that are also going to fall in that leadership role. But you would have, maybe an operational side of the business, and then you might have a
Mm-hmm.
marketing segment, and then you might have the specific sales segment. I mean, all of those leaders probably they might be focusing on a little bit, maybe not, maybe I'm wrong, but like different parts of the psychology behind it.
Mhm.
Do you are you looking at this from sort of like the top down? Are you helping people at each level? How do you, I guess, maybe walk us
Good
through, if you're
question.
going to work with a company, what do you do? I would assume you start at the top, but like how granular do you get?
Yeah, this is a really good question because it sort of gets to this, goes back to that environment part, right? So if you're, let's say you're a middle manager working in an organization where your senior leadership literally doesn't care about what employees think. Let's just use that as an example. Senior leadership, let's just say, is cold-blooded, money hungry. I could care less as long as you make me money, right? That's sort
Mhm.
of old school, which, by the way, I don't see a whole lot of. Good, thank God. But let's say you're a good natured leader in that sort of environment. Um, One of the questions that comes up, and very similar to your question, is can that leader do anything positive? Can they operate in that sort of environment? The answer, I think, is yes, but it's really hard. And so my answer to your question is we take both a bottom up and a top down approach. And I think that really is the best way to do it because you're right. You do want to start. I think a really logical place to start is top down, right? If you don't have the senior most leadership team, the board, the C-suite aligned on what's really valuable and aligned on the very simple premise that if you create good experiences for employees, they're going to produce more and they're going to produce better
Mhm.
work.
Yeah.
And that's going to generate more satisfied customers, which is going to make you more money. That's a really important place to start because that starts to shape all the little decisions in the environment in which those leaders below them operate in. So it makes a huge difference. With that said, I do think it's a mistake to only do it top down
Mhm.
because we talked about culture as the shared behavior pattern and mindsets among these groups of people. Let's say the culture is the whole organization. But within each team, you have what we sometimes call a climate. So
Okay.
in every large organization, you can find some groups of people that have a terrible climate. Maybe it's a great culture overall, but you get a bad egg, you get a bad leader who's just, micromanager. They belittle their employees, they crack the whip on them, they make them work crazy hours. Absolutely happens. And then again, you find really, really good leaders with good intentions who are really trying hard in bad cultures. And so you can have both good and bad climates as pockets in those different departments that you alluded to. So the way I tend to approach this work and the way we approach this work at Qualtrics is we try to take both that top down approach and start to chip away at those mindsets and behavior patterns of the senior leadership, but we also do so from the bottom up. And we equip frontline managers, middle managers with very practical tools that they could go use, behavior patterns, things they can, sometimes it's things as simple as when you have a team meeting, ask more questions and talk less. Those little sorts of tips can change the climate of a team. And let's say you start to chip away, and all of a sudden you have managers who are engaging in much better behaviors. Their employees are starting to get more engaged. They're producing more. Guess what? Other leaders start to notice and they start to get a
Yeah.
little FOMO because I don't know any organization that doesn't have competitive leaders. So you start to grow that culture from the bottom up. So I do think it's a dual approach.
Yeah. It makes sense. I would think, yeah, I mean, you've got to have senior leadership bought in, but at the end of the day, there's a few of them. And if you have a company of thousands, you've also got to, reach down deeper to make a big difference. Um, you mentioned kind of the different types of leaders, like the crack the whip, work all the time, or also like, I only just make me money. I don't care.
Right.
I don't care what that means to you. Earlier, you did talk about kind of the statistics and the science behind the field of psychology. I feel like there's been a shift in the way that people manage in many different industries. Like, just I don't even know that it's like one. Do you? When you talk about leadership and the styles, do you have are there studies and like statistics to back up, kind of what works best? Because I know
Mhm.
it in, we may be going back a lot of years, but it used to be like, just work people as hard as possible.
Right.
That's the only goal is to, get as much out of them for as little pay. And I think
Right.
that has shifted a lot in a lot of industries. Are there studies or you know statistics literature to support that?
Yes, there are, and there's a lot, and we've also have some recent data to support that. Um, I do want to answer that question very directly, but what I think might be interesting is if we kind of go back way back in time a little bit, because I'm one of the things I've been really fascinated with in my studies as a even though I'm an organizational psychologist by education, by training, I'm also fascinated with fields like evolutionary psychology.
Mhm.
And so evolutionary psychology is to to me one of the most useful theoretical backdrops to explain why are humans so messy and crazy? Why do we do the weird things that we do? Why do we say the uncharacteristic things we do? Evolutionary psychology is very helpful there. And when I started studying that as part of my research for the book, one of the things I stumbled across that I thought was one of the most fascinating things I ran across that I didn't know, which is that there are basically these two paths that humans use to attain social status, to attain leadership in groups. And this has been true throughout human history. The first path is dominance. And this is kind of what we were describing a minute ago. It's my way or the highway. I'm going to basically use force or the threat of force to attain status, to attain power, to attain resources, and I'm going to put everybody else down. That that's certainly an approach. And it's certainly an approach. If you just read a little bit of history, you'll see the signatures of that. Or if you've worked for a bad manager, you've seen that before.
Yeah.
But then there's this other path that humans use to attaining social status known as prestige. And prestige is very different. It might be akin to servant leadership, but essentially it's leadership and status, social status gets conferred upon a person because of the value they bring to the group. Basically, I'm good at something, you're good at something, and we share that gift for the benefit of the collective. And so because we're good at that thing, everybody says, okay, well, you're the guy, you're the gal at that topic. So we receive the rewards of leadership. So these two patterns, what I found so fascinating is that the pattern of dominance is ubiquitous across social species. I live in Louisiana. We got crawfish. You can see it play out in my backyard. I got a pond in my backyard. Frogs, fish, crickets, geese, ducks, you name it. All use dominance strategy. And so we're animals too. We use dominant strategies as humans. But prestige appears to be relatively unique to humans, and which also suggests that it's powered by the more advanced parts of our brain and likely evolved because humans were always working together in groups. And leadership, I think one really good explanation for why do we have leaders in the first place? Why do humans look to leaders? It's a social adaptation. It's an adaptation that helped humans solve the problems of social living and coordination. And so, prestige, let's fast forward to today and your research question. One of the things we do every year is we have this gigantic database of like 31 million employee responses to their surveys their company sends them. And we analyze that data set every year. And one of the things we do in it is we take the group of companies that are represented that are the best off financially. In other words, they're getting the most out of their resources, they're getting the best return on their investments,
Yeah.
all these financial metrics. And we isolate that really top group. And by the way, that group, they also have to hit another bar, which is they have to create a pretty good employee experience. They have to be in the top quartile of employee experience. But most importantly, they're really elite financially. And usually that's in like less than 50 companies. And so we take that 50 companies and we compare it to the average of our database, which is like many thousands of companies. And we basically are asking the question, what's different about those high performing organizations than the middling majority? And over and over and over again, what we see, Jason, points right back to prestige and trust building leadership behaviors. Do do those companies, I mean, do they have leaders that just crack the whip and they use dominant strategies? We don't see evidence of that. What we see is evidence of leaders who are highly effective at communicating. They're highly effective at explaining, here's what our company's mission is and how your job contributes to that. Highly effective at showing employees that they matter and their work matters. They're committed to creating good recognition, giving people paths to grow in their profession at the company. All those things that we would look for in a leader that's pursuing effectiveness and group performance through prestige.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I mean, personally, a welcome a welcome thing to hear. I'm glad that style of leadership of cracking the whip and is just it's never appealed to me as a leader, and certainly
Yeah.
gravitate to those people.
Now
But
the trick, if I could just add one thought
yeah,
there, one of the things I think people sometimes mistake, and I'm not saying you are, but I've been guilty of this, is thinking that dominance can't work or dominance won't work,
yeah,
and
sure,
that's not true. And it's unfortunate that a lot of leaders use that strategy because it's been rewarded,
hmm,
because they deliver results, because they're in a culture that's toxic,
yeah,
and because oftentimes those companies thrive in environments where employees don't have a lot of leverage, you know? And so that's important to note, is that some people buy into those cultures because they're geared for it, and you can be successful. But what I would submit to people is that as the consumer world and as the employee world is becoming, it's much easier to change vendors today than it used to be. It's much easier. If you have a bad experience at one restaurant, just don't go there anymore. Just go across the street. It's so
yeah,
easy. Or if you don't like your bank, go to the next bank. So organizations are starting to realize this, that they, especially in this world of AI, they are competing on experiences. They're competing for talent. They're competing for consumers on experience because it's so stinking easy to change. They don't have as much leverage. When leaders don't have as much leverage, dominance falls apart.
hmm. I'm so glad you said that, and actually, what you just said kind of better explains why I even asked the question in the first place. Because I think that yes, dominance does work
Yeah.
in a lot of instances. I've had instances where people have told me you should yell more and then you'll get the things you want. And I'm like, I don't want that. But that's why I asked about the data. Is it, if it supports that prestige and culture and, that type of environment creates better better success in a company, like that's, now you can say, okay, here's actual data to say your
Right.
company will do better if you can treat your employees with respect and lead from not a dominance angle. um, it also brings up another point that I wanted to ask you about is people. I think people are motivated by different things. And I would imagine that's a big part of what you do is kind of maybe helping leaders identify that, because I feel like this
Mm.
is a shift I've noticed in maybe it's generational or what, but it's like it used to be. I feel like it used to be like, oh, just pay someone more. You want the better person. You want them to work
Right.
harder. You just pay them more. And then now I feel like that doesn't always work. Like some people are like, I don't care about X number of dollars more an hour. I want more time off, or I want a different title, or whatever it is. Like there's a mix of motivations that people have
Right.
And
Right.
I feel like as a leader, figuring those things out, sometimes it's hard to, I think sometimes it's hard to figure out, like, what does this person really want? I don't think giving them more money, like, people like it, but it's not the only thing. It's not the only motivator. So how would you respond to that? And maybe what do you do to address that sort of, those differences?
This is, I'm so glad you bring this up because it gives me an opportunity to kind of explain, I think, what a lot of people, what I would call a misnomer, which is this idea that, when you look at the motivation literature and what motivates humans, one of the things you run into right away is this idea that humans all essentially have the same motives. And a lot of people are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. 20 years after him came David McClellan. His theory was even simpler. It was basically like, look, people have three primary motives: to affiliate, to be social, to achieve something, to grow, to develop, and then to have some power and control over your life, some self efficacy. And a lot of people would, and again, I'm guilty of this too. You look at that and you say, oh, the motives are the same for pretty much everybody. You just pull those levers and then, you pay people more and they'll be happier. They can meet the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy and then great, we're off and running. But then there's this other side of the spectrum, which is kind of going to your question, which is, but certainly everybody's unique, right? And so maybe I'm at a different stage of my life and money's not as important to me, or maybe I'm younger in my career and it's really important to me. Growth and money are really important to me. And the misnomer is that a lot of people have a tendency to look at those two things as like, oh, one of them has to be right and the other's wrong. If everybody's unique in their motives, then the theory that we're all the same is wrong. Here's where it gets challenging for the human mind. Both of those things are true at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd be hard pressed to find a human who lives on the planet today in any society or in any society that has ever existed that did not care about being a valued member of the group. McClellan's need for affiliation. Who in the world can you imagine that doesn't want to be part of a group? This is wired into us. I mean, imagine 20,000 years ago, a human walking around who got excommunicated from their group. That person basically that's a death sentence, essentially.
Right.
So we carry that baggage with us today. Find me somebody who doesn't want to grow in a meaningful way, personally and professionally. I mean, sure, you could probably find some, but I would argue deep down, maybe on the surface it doesn't appear that way, but deep down they have a great need for it that just isn't being met, or they're covering it up with other things.
Yeah.
And find me someone who doesn't want to have more control over their lives. So I think there's truth in both of these general points, but I do think what you're saying is really important in that those needs manifest themselves differently for different people. And this was something McClellan even pointed out. Some people tend to be more social, affiliative dominant, right? That's the stronger motive for them. Some people, power is a bigger motive. Some people, achievement's the bigger motive. That's true. And the way that those needs manifest themselves, how do I define power and control for me might be different for you. And to your point about generations, I'm not a huge fan of generational research. I think it leads people to, paint these broad strokes about people.
Mm-hmm.
That's akin to just saying, hey, all white people are this way or all black people are that way, which obviously doesn't have a good ring to it. Well, same thing with, all the Gen Xers are like this and all the Gen Zers are like this. But there is truth in that when you're at a different stage in life and you're in a different age, the way that those needs manifest themselves or you want them manifested are going to change. So I do think there's value in leaders understanding, well, what are those fundamental motives that are always going to be valuable to people? But then remembering that, for Jason and for Ben, it might be a little different. And let me go ask. Let's have some conversations. And to your point, it's not always easy it requires a lot of conversation to get down to those motives.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love that point. Just ask. I think that's
just ask.
something that I mean, for a long time, I didn't. I don't know. I don't know if I thought you weren't supposed to or what, but it was like I reached a point where I was like, maybe I'm just going to ask. Maybe I'm just going to say, like, what do you need? What do you need to perform, at your best and have satisfaction and be in a place that you want to stay. I think is ultimately, um, maybe figuring it out. Asking is the easiest way.
And Jason, I love that because our research shows over and over and over and over that when leaders ask people questions and really listen, it doesn't, that has a dual effect on the employee experience. One, it gives the leader some feedback into what decision can I make to make this employee more engaged, more satisfied, more motivated. But it has an independent effect. When a leader asks somebody below them in the hierarchy a question, I view that as a very small show of vulnerability. It basically says, you know something that I don't. And that is very empowering. And one of the lines I like to use is that, look, when you ask questions of people and you really listen, it tells them that they matter, and
Mhm.
mattering matters to people. So it's so powerful just to ask the question.
Yeah.
So powerful. It's surprising sometimes how powerful it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes so much sense. Well, on that note, let me switch gears here and ask you a few questions that I ask every guest. And the first one is, the name of the show is Know Your Why. So I do always ask each guest, what is your why? I, I'm so fascinated by. As I said when we started, I didn't know that organizational psychology was a thing. It's really fascinating and something that I find. That I want to know more about, just from a business perspective. But what is your why? Like, why do you do this? Why do you kind of what's motivating you? You said you wrote a book that you didn't intend to write, and tell me a little bit about kind of behind the scenes. What's your motivation?
I view my job as a vocation. And one of the things that I've gone through in my personal journey, my personal struggles as a human is I've been through those periods of my life where I viewed my work as a means to an end. I used to view it as this simple currency exchange for time and money. I always envision, I use this imagery in the book of, you're at an international airport and you go to the kiosk and you hand your 8 hours in and you get your paycheck back. And I used to reflect on that, like, man, this is just such a bad trade because, like, in the words of, what's his name? David Crosby, time is the final currency.
Mhm.
And that little bottle we pull those hours out is opaque. We don't know how much is in there. So if you're trading it for something as mundane and fungible as money, and that's how I viewed it, that's a very bleak place to live. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people, either through the circumstance they're in, through the culture that they're in, or by choice, or feel that way.
Yeah.
And yet, the more I study history, the more I study the history of work, the more I study evolutionary history, the more I realize that work is not a simple exchange for time and money. That's not what it is. It's a way that we contribute to the communities that we live in.
Mhm.
If we go back to that definition of an organization, a group of people who's working together to solve some problems that other humans have. I see absolutely nothing wrong with taking pride in one's contribution to society. And so that's, I think, what my vocation is to both help leaders, business leaders, and employees understand that work is inherently valuable. And these dreams that I used to have of, oh man, one day I'm gonna make enough money to where I never have to work again. That's crossed my mind. I look back at that young fool. I call him a sophomore, right? The clever fool.
Yeah.
That wasn't a very thoughtful way to think about it. And so now I have a very different mindset. Is I'm always going to do what I love to do, and do something you love and call it work. And hey, if people value it enough to pay you for it, great. but I really think that's my vocation. And I'd say that's my why. I want people to find more value in their work. I want people to see it as inherently valuable, regardless of the job that they do, and view it differently. Because if we view it differently, if we have a different mindset about it, then we can get so much more fulfillment and joy out of it.
Yeah. I love that. I love that point. I've always kind of enjoyed working, and yes, you need to make money. There's
Yeah.
like the tangible pieces of that, but in a lot of ways, I've always enjoyed working, and the idea of like I'm going to get to the point where I don't have to work anymore. That's not even appealing to me. It
Yeah.
looks different, right? But it's not. So I think that's such a good point. Sort of finding that value to yourself and to society. When people hear this and they want to connect with you, what's the best way? And please pitch the book. I think I can see it behind you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I saw all the authors do that. So I was like, well, I guess I should do that
put it
too.
behind you somewhere, so it's featured. But yeah, tell us about how to reach you and how people can find the book.
Yeah. So the book is live as of February 24th, and in store. The best place to reach out to me is benjamingranger.com, and real simple website. I have a lot of information about what's in the book, but one of the things I did that's I think was fun. This Before I share that, I got to tell you a funny story though, Jason. When I'm a first time author, never wrote a book before, and in my first manuscript, I had like 30 song quotes scattered throughout the book. I had some as epigraphs at the beginning of a chapter, beginning of a section. I had some weaved in organically. I had movie quotes because I'm huge into rock music, classic rock, progressive rock, um, and I really like funny movies. So I tried to weave all that stuff into my writing. So I sent my first manuscript. You probably know where this is going. I sent my first manuscript to the publisher, and they were like, "This is great. Got your permissions for all these quotes?" And I'm like, what does that mean? so,
Yeah.
so I learned a hard lesson about copyright law. And so what they basically, I had to scrub, all my song quotes. I thought I was very clever, but I had to scrub them all. So what I did instead was I created a companion playlist that goes along with each chapter of the book, because some of the words and the lyrics and the meaning in many of those songs was highly influential to me as I wrote, and I wanted to share that. So on the website benjamingranger.com, one of the tabs called Lanyap, which is a little Cajun word. I'm Cajun, so it's a little Cajun word that means a little something extra. And on there, you'll see a chapter by chapter list of songs, and then a link to the playlist for people to kind of follow along. And really, some of the song connections are very obvious. Some
Mhm.
of them aren't. So it's a little bit of a scavenger hunt for the reader. So hopefully people will enjoy that challenge and enjoy the listen.
I mean, I will, because I have. It's funny you say. I mean, I have so much of. I feel like so much of life almost has like a soundtrack associated with it, and it's like
Yeah.
you hear certain
Yeah.
songs, and it immediately takes you to, oh, this was this thing, or this person in my life, like people in my life. There's a song that goes with them in a lot of instances, and so I love that concept. Um, the copyright thing is a funny beat. You can't even have a business. You can't put songs on a business Instagram account because of that same like copyright
Right.
thing. So it's a
It's
it's a funny
crazy.
world, um, but no, that's fantastic, and I love that. I love that you did that and created the playlist to go along with it. So that is super cool to me. Um, Dr. Granger, thank you for coming on the show today. Thank you for sharing everything that you did. I definitely want to get the book as well and check out the playlist. It's a leader worth following. I'm
Yes,
not sure if
sir.
you actually explicitly said the title, um,
Yeah.
but
Let's see.
want to make sure people know
I
that
got that.
and check it out. There we go.
Leader worth following: how to master yourself, influence others, and create exceptional experiences. So it's definitely got a self-help theme to it, but I can promise people it's a highly practical book. That's one of the important things I always weave into my work is I do like to get deep and nerdy, as you could probably tell, and it does get deep and nerdy, but it also comes back up to the current day and says, okay, here's some research-based things you can do that's derived from really good research that we've done and that we've sourced. So very practical book. And if you like a nerdy deep dive and something with the practical takeaway, I think people will enjoy this book.
Love it. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate your time. This has been a great conversation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And folks listening, make sure you connect with Dr. Granger. Check out the book. Please like, rate, and review the show so we can continue to get great guests. And as always, thank you so much for listening.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why?